Coast to Coast AM, The Art Bell Show. I am Hilly Rose, sitting in and wishing you a kind and gentle night. Tonight is History Night. History of the childhood of Jesus. It's not a religious thing, it's historical. What it is information that has been developed over 25 years about the mystery, not the mystique, but the mystery of the family of Jesus and about Jesus himself. You're going to be really fascinated for information that you have never heard before. So in order for me to catch up with myself here, I will take a very brief pause, and then we will come back and talk about not the mystique, not the religious aspect, but something, and if you believe in the Bible and all the stories in the Bible, this will only reinforce what you believe. But you will come at it from a different perspective. You will come at it from a historical standpoint. And I think this will be really, really, really fascinating. I am Hilly Rose, and we will continue after this. There was a peace treaty signed today concerning the Holy Land, and my personal opinion is it is as likely to fail as the other accords were, the Camp David Accords. There's too much strife in the Middle East, and maybe we can talk about that later on an open line. But right now, I want to tell you about the Holy Land, my visits to the Holy Land. One of the most fascinating things about going there is that you come back and realize that the Bible is not all fiction. And maybe it's not fiction in any way. I don't know. But what I do know is that when you're there, people will tell you, and this is making this up hypothetically, if the Bible says Ruth was in Beersheba and she went to the well and it was next to the oak tree, and you go there and you go to Beersheba and you see the oak tree, and it says she walked 40 paces and you walk 40 paces, and sure enough, you dig down, or they dug down over the years and found that there was a well right where the Bible said it would be. And there are many, many other artifacts like that. The underground city that you go to, they have dug out under the existing Jerusalem and have found another city underneath it from many years ago. And so there is no way you can say that the Bible is not a real historical record, excepting you got to find out where these stories came from. So that's why we're going to go to our guest tonight. He is a man who has spent some 25 years researching Jesus and his family, and he felt it was time that the world understood the history of all this. And it's not a bit different than the works of, let's say, Zecharia Sitchin, who went back to the Sumerian. I guess you call them, they're not artifacts, they're tablets. That's what they are. They're tablets. And they tell a story. Different kind of story, but nonetheless, it is the precursor to the history of the Bible, of Jesus, and of Jesus' family. I want to introduce to you now Glenn Kimball, who is the man that has spent some 25 years of his life digging around, getting the information, which he says has been there all the time. Is that right, Glenn?
Correct. It's been there. In fact, if you have a real good library card, you can find it on your own most of the time.
In the libraries that exist today?
Well, through the public through the Library of Congress, and especially if you have access to the European Great British libraries or the French libraries or the Scottish libraries, you can find most of this information as public information still today.
In other words, it's been there. We just didn't know what we were looking at. Is that right?
Exactly. In fact, most of it has been discredited, though, by word of mouth, but vindicated by research. The great scholars of the world have said, well, this information actually exists. I don't believe it, but here's the evidence that it exists.
That's not too unusual. They're called politicians, I think.
I think so, too. I've known a few of those boys in my day.
Okay, Glenn, you have an interesting story about being in South America, and that sort of is what got you started.
Oh, yeah. I've lived in several places around the world, in Mexico and South America and Europe for a while. And when I was a young man, on my days off, I befriended two of my very closest friends were Catholic priests, and we used to sit down and play cards and talk and laugh. And in querying them over a card table, I found out that they were in a sort of exile from the Vatican, had been security force at the Vatican Library, and began telling me tales about how extensive the documents were that were in that 17 miles of library rows there. And
17 miles in the Vatican?
17 miles
wow.
of library books underneath the Vatican. As a matter of fact, the Vatican has made a public statement here in the last year about the great blue fungus plague that is plaguing many of the ancient manuscripts and documents in the Vatican. That's a well-known fact. It hasn't. The common man doesn't understand how significant that destruction is, but it is one of the greatest tragedies in our day.
Well, couldn't they just put it all on computer or store it?
They're obviously doing that with the haste of in as much resources they possibly can, and have done an excellent job of that.
Okay, because I don't want to hear that they didn't have the money to do it. I mean, this is
no, sir. That is not the problem.
Okay, the problem is just getting enough computers and people to do it.
The problem was that they didn't discover the fungus in time before it destroyed some of the precious records.
17 miles of it. So if it's 17 miles, then this has to go back, almost to the days of Christ. I mean, how old are these volumes?
Well, you must understand that the Romans were famous for one thing. They were famous for book burnings. They were famous for telling the people what they should know, but they were also famous for keeping a copy. The book burnings in the 2nd century, which were deliberately intended to exclude all the writings of women and about women, really wiped out many of the local churches and their libraries. However, the Vatican itself put a lot of those books, took copies of them and put them in the Vatican. And when the Goths and Visigoths came down from the north and toppled the Roman Empire, the 6th century is really the era of public disclosure for many of the ancient documents about the time of Jesus. So many of the documents that we have today about Jesus and his life come from copies from the 6th century. The Goths and Visigoths had a personal interest in those documents because they were descendants of the great house of David or the family of Jesus themselves, which is an amazing coincidence. So they had a personal interest in toppling not only toppling the Roman Empire, but in preserving the documents and disseminating the information that had been hidden for centuries.
Speaking of hidden, I don't think I've mentioned to people that you have written a book called The Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus, and we'll get into what's in that book a little bit later in the program.
Okay.
One thing I'd like to hit real early is we're about to come up to the millennium. Big things about to happen. And according to you, we're a little late. The millennium's already happened.
Well, no. The millennium, the end of the millennium's already happened. We have to understand that the calendar itself was created under the direction of Caesar in 533 A.D., He left that charge to a man named Dionysius Ignatius, and he originally instructed Dionysius to create a calendar and use the year 0 as the birth of the Roman Empire. Well, Dionysius didn't use the year 0 as the birth of the Roman Empire. He used the date on which he supposed that Jesus was born, which was 7 years off. And so the year 2000 was really in the year 1993. We live in the year 2005, which is if we are to record things as did Dionysius Ignatius suggest.
But how did he know what day Jesus was born?
He didn't know what day Jesus was born. That's why he made the mistake. However, we know what day, or not the day, but certainly the year that Jesus was born by the the events themselves. We know, for example, that Herod, who persecuted the baby Jesus and killed all the 2-year-old children in and around Bethlehem, died a very specific day. He died of a great lunar eclipse that can be traced back today. We know exactly what date that was, and it was in 4 B.C. And so Jesus had to have been born before 4 B.C. We also know from Kepler in the 16th century who had the records himself of what the Star of Bethlehem really was. It was the merger of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Pisces, and he had gotten his information from the prophet Daniel and Micah and several of the very historic rabbis that have kept the records of the Messiah text over the years. And he records that the Star of Bethlehem appeared again in 1603, and he described the Star of Bethlehem in the eastern sky, which was the merger of Jupiter and Saturn. And that event we can retrace back on computer regenerations, and that occurred 4 times in the year 7 B.C.
Okay, let me just reassure some people who are saying, wait a minute, I know my Bible, that what you are saying and will be saying tonight is not contradictory to the Bible, but it is filling in the holes, as it were.
Oh, it's not contradictory at all. As a matter of fact, if anything, it vindicates everything that it's said in there. It's just that there are so many gaps in the Bible. For example, we have one page in the Bible that talks about his birth in each of the Gospels, and then it jumps to the last part of his ministry and ignores the rest of his life. And so Jesus has been raised to the status of myth. And if anything, what I have tried to do is eliminate the myth part, and let's get him back into the position where he originally was.
Okay, I'm confused, though. You say we're in 2005, but yet you say we haven't passed the millennium yet?
Well, yes, we have.
Oh, okay.
In that sense, yes. I'm sorry. I want to clarify that misunderstanding.
Okay, so all these big parties that everybody's planning for the New Year's Eve are a little late.
They are late. They are according to the Dionysius calendar. However, they are off. We already had it.
Oh, darn, I slept right through it.
I knew.
Yeah.
I was there. You know, I slept through it, too.
All right. Well, that's part of what we're going to be talking about tonight, and basically, I mean, I didn't even realize that Jesus had 2 brothers, and
he had 4 brothers.
Had 4 brothers.
Yes.
Okay.
He had 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers.
Not all the sons of God.
No. Joseph, who married the Virgin Mary, clearly was married before he married the Virgin Mary, and he had 4 children. And so James, who is James the Just of the Bible, is Jesus' older brother from Joseph's first marriage, and she died, and he was a widower at the time he married the Virgin Mary.
Wow. I mean, this is hot stuff.
Hot stuff.
Little late for the daily newspapers, but darned interesting as a historic fact.
Not a problem.
All right. Again, because I want to end up this segment, people understanding, we are talking about the historical documents that have always been there, just that nobody has gone in to uncover it like you have in the last 25 years.
Well,
go ahead.
There's thousands of historians that have, and that would agree with me identically. We just haven't done it in our verbal communication. We haven't done it in our common traditions, verbal traditions with each other. But the evidence hasn't really been a secret at all for thousands of scholars around the world.
Well, secret from me. So we'll look forward to revealing some of these secrets in just a few moments. You've written another book besides The Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus?
Yeah, The Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus is a Christmas book talking about his early years. But the second book is called The Hidden Politics of the Crucifixion, which is a book which contains the letters of Pontius Pilate, Herod, Tiberius Caesar, and Augustus Caesar back and forth to each other, discussing the crucifixion itself, and also the writings of Nicodemus, who was the best friend of Joseph of Arimathea. This book is going to be just hot because it tells the story from the other perspective. Okay, so hail, hail, the gang's all here, Caesar and all of his boys, and we will continue and talk with Glenn Kimball in just a moment, right here on Coast to Coast AM, the Art Bell Show. I am Hilly Rose. The Art Bell Show. I am Hilly Rose. My guest tonight, Glenn Kimball, who himself has been a talk show host for a number of years in Salt Lake City, and is very involved. Now he's no longer a talk show host. I guess once you always are, Glenn. But he is spending all of his time now on research and getting out the historical facts, and that's what we are focusing on tonight. So again, I want to assure anybody listening that we're not trying to shake up your belief in the Bible or your interpretation of the Bible or anything like that. What we are trying to do is
fill in the gaps, give you the information that verifies and documents that what it says in the Bible actually is true. It just, we're coming at it from a somewhat different perspective. By the way, before I forget, in case you've just tuned in and say, well, what did Art Bell say? What did Art Bell say? What he said is, and this is the quick message, he's coming back next Wednesday, and we will replay that particular conversation, I guess, in the next hour. So stick with me, and we continue here with Glenn Kimball. Glenn, let me sort of jump around a little bit, and then get the headlines out, and then perhaps in the next hour we can go sequentially.
Very good.
Everybody knows, I mean, this is common knowledge, there's no doubt about it, that Jesus' father was a poor carpenter, and Jesus himself was a poor carpenter. Right? Wrong?
Wrong.
Wrong. Wait a minute. It says so in the Bible, doesn't it?
Well, the word carpenter is mistranslated from the Greek, the word tech, from which we get our word architect. Jesus' father was really a contractor, an architect, a surveyor, and a builder of cities and great palaces and thrones. As a matter of fact, there's a very well-recorded manuscript where Jesus helps his father build one of the thrones for one of the kings. And obviously, this isn't building wooden fences and spoons and things. Joseph was a very wealthy man. He came from the throne of David, and that throne carried with it great wealth and substance. We notice, we all overlook one fact. When the Magi came to visit Jesus, they brought with them a king's ransom of gold, frankincense, and myrrh that would have made any family wealthy for 100 years. We gloss right over that and say, well, instantly Jesus was back poor again. That's not true.
Doesn't quite hang together.
The logic of that doesn't hold water, and obviously the historical evidence doesn't hold water either. When Jesus' earthly father Joseph died when he was about 14, you notice that Joseph isn't anywhere in the crucifixion story at all. Under Jewish law, his great-uncle took over the protectorship of the family, and his great-uncle was a man named Joseph of Arimathea. And Joseph of Arimathea was named nobilis decurial by Caesar himself and was the third wealthiest man on the planet at that time. And so part of the reason we don't have histories about Jesus is because he had the ability to sail the world with his great-uncle and involved in the great tin and lead mine business, the mining business of his great-uncle. And they had, as a matter of fact, the wealth of the family was actually the wealth that underwrote the early ministries of all of the apostles as they sailed around the world. And we often think, well, maybe they hitched a ride on a boat someplace and visited someplace. They were well-financed, extremely well-financed.
It's amazing. But it makes sense, really, because it's the wealthy, and especially in those years, who have the power to be heard and to do what they want to do. So if you look at it from that perspective, you begin to understand that, that really could have happened. Another thing that makes me, it just blows my mind, is that Mary actually not came from England, but spent a lot of time in England. She was established the first Christian church in England. Is that correct?
Well, her mother, Saint Anna, and by the way, Saint Anna is very famous all around the world. She is one of the patron saints of England, was born in England. And you ask, why? How in the world was the mother of the Virgin Mary born in England? I have to tell you that at 600 B.C., when the Babylonians came in to conquer Palestine at that moment in history, a great number of the royal family, as well as a lot of other people, had to get out of town. And just like in the Greeks who had to get out of town at the time of the Trojan War, we know that Brutus, who was the father of England itself, said he had a dream of Diana where she told him to go through the gates of Hercules and find the most peaceful place in all the world. And the gates of Hercules were obviously the Rock of Gibraltar, and the place that they went was also England. So England was a sanctuary for royal families in exile, and the House of David is no exception to this rule. Part of the reason why the history of England is so intimately connected with Jesus is because their family not only emigrated there or sought sanctuary there, but they also had business there. Joseph of Arimathea was named Nobilis Decurio by the Roman Caesar because he owned the great tin and lead mines there. And
in Britain?
Pardon?
In Britain?
In Britain.
That's where the mines were?
That's where the mines was in Britain. And Nobilis Decurio, Cicero said that it was easier to be a Roman senator than Nobilis Decurio, and so this position of Jesus' great uncle was an extremely important position. He was the Dale Carnegie of his day.
So how did the Virgin Mary, she was in Palestine. I don't understand this. Her mother was in England and she was in Palestine?
Well, her mother was born in England and reverse immigrated back into Palestine just before the birth of Mary and married a man named Joachim. However, after Jesus' crucifixion, there was a great exodus called the Exodus of the Faithful in 36 A.D., and Mary reverted back and escaped Jerusalem under the protectorship of Joseph of Arimathea once again. And where did she go to? She went to Great Britain, where she lived and died toward the end of her life in 48 A.D. She died in 48 A.D.
That's mind blower, just mind blower. You're now saying that Jesus had a couple of brothers, and that these brothers wrote the story of their lives. Is that right?
Well, actually, two of his brothers were so prolific that they probably wrote more ancient text than all the apostles put together.
Sure, if they were wealthy, they could do that. They could afford to do it.
Well, they were very wealthy, and those two brothers were James and Thomas. And by the way, most of those documents are not in the canon. They were excluded for a very political reason after the death of Jesus. For example, we have a good copy, an excellent copy of the Gospel of Thomas, which is the most prolific, wonderful book with the sayings of Jesus in anywhere you can go. And that book is not in the Bible, but we have a good copy of that found on the banks of the Nile River in 1945 in the Nag Hammadi Library. An excellent example of a book that they knew about at the time of the creation of the canon, but was a book that was excluded from the canon for a political reason.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I didn't want to leave the impression that all of this was coming out of the Library of the Vatican. Where around the world have you found these histories? The
predominant, if you want to talk about sheer numbers, the Vatican, obviously, number one. Number two, in the Great British Museum and in the Royal Archives of the Library of England, because their history is so intimately connected with this history. In France and in Scotland, obviously there are still some very, very good copies in Egypt. You got to remember, at the time of Jesus, when the Jews were in control of Palestine at the time of Jesus, it was outlawed to have anything in your synagogue except the 5 books of Moses. And so in 73 B.C., they hired a delegation of 7 priests from each of the tribes of Israel to go to Egypt to retrieve the books which we now call the Old Testament. We would not have had the Old Testament had they not left the country and sought the Old Testament in the great library of Alexandria, which burned in 63 B.C.
Don't sound like fun folks. I mean, we talk about the Spanish Inquisition, but we don't really realize what went on decades earlier, or centuries earlier, I should say.
That library had 740,000 scrolls, it is estimated. And so the numbers of books that were excluded even from the Old Testament, the Old Testament refers to about 84 books that are not included in the Old Testament, but the number of books that could have been included in the Old Testament is mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling.
Glenn, this is on a slightly different subject, but I just want to get it out of the way. It's my curiosity, my personal curiosity. And in your book, Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus, you've got just one sentence that makes so much sense to me, because I'm a believer that there is an entity that we all descend from, and I believe that this is an extraterrestrial somehow, some way. It's doesn't negate God, does not negate Jesus, but it just somehow blew me away when I read this one sentence in your book, which says it's a bizarre story. And you say it's bizarre, which nobody can take literally, but I have to wonder about it. It says, in one story, Jesus slides down a beam of light. Well, that doesn't seem so far-fetched to me, because if you really study and read all the information about the possibility that we are descendants of extraterrestrials, And, Moses comes down from a mountain, and we have all these people who pray to volcanoes and what have you. And if that bears any fruit at all, and I realize this has nothing to do with your research, it's just a personal thing I wanted to ask you, is it not possible then, if Jesus comes down on a beam of light, that would verify that there are extraterrestrials?
Well, there are ancient texts which speak of the fact that Jesus was the Savior of many worlds. And when we say worlds, we're talking about planets, I suspect, from the text. I probably am not the foremost scholar in the world with regard to extraterrestrials, nor do I write about them, nor are they included in my book. But that seems logical to me that there are, in fact, other entities. I remember the first abduction of the great Southern Baptist gentleman in the 50s that was abducted, lost 3 days of his life, and he, under hypnosis, he said that he had the presence of mind to ask the beings about Jesus, because he was a minister, a Baptist minister, and they said, well, Jesus is the Savior of many worlds. And that particular quote, the 50s, caught my attention as a young child. So.
Yeah, you can interpret it any way you want, but it does give some validity to this other theory. That's not what you're about, though. So let's get back to some of the research that you have done.
Right.
I wanted to ask you about again the Virgin Mary, and you say she was 14 years of age, and something happened. Joseph came home, and she was with child, and he was very upset about this.
Well, Mary had been taken by her parents because her parents knew. By the way, the birth of Mary is a story called the Immaculate Conception. The Immaculate Conception does not refer to the birth of Jesus. It refers to the birth of Mary herself. And any good Catholic who knows their stuff knows that that is exactly what it's referring to. But most of them don't know the story. That story is in my book for the first time in public, probably in centuries. But Mary was born. That story is a miraculous, fun story to read, extremely interesting to read. But when she was 3 years old, she was taken and taken to the great temple of Jerusalem and sequestered there to protect her virtue. And there were people who had tried to buy her out of great rich men from all over the world who knew about the Virgin Mary and what was about to happen to her, tried to buy her out. The great Albiathar, for example, tried to buy her for his son. And the Virgin Mary had the presence of mind, obviously, and also the free agency to choose, and she turned him down and said no. So she was housed in the great Temple of Jerusalem, and the
wait a minute. How could she have a choice in those years? I mean, women were so looked down on. I don't follow.
This lady was the heir to the throne of David. She was royal blood. She had her free agency to do as she pleased. She had great autonomy. People looked up to her and respected her from her birth. This was not a normal lady in any way, shape, or form.
So are you saying to me the story of the reason they were on the road is because they had to pay taxes is not a true story?
Well, it is a true story.
It is.
Oh, it very definitely is. What the betrothal of Mary and Joseph is also another story in my book. It was also fulfillment of prophecy. No one knows how Joseph and Mary met or how Joseph was selected for her to be her husband. Joseph had no intentions of marrying the Virgin Mary, and the story of that selection is one of the most interesting stories and answers to an ancient prophecy, which also is not included in the Bible, that I've ever heard in my whole life.
Well, why don't you tell us about it now?
Well, basically, the prophecy had said that the one who was to be betrothed to the Virgin would bring his staff to the temple, and that out of his staff would sprout a flower, and a dove would land on his shoulder. So when Mary became of age to be betrothed, they gathered every single bachelor in the whole country, and they came and they brought their staffs to the temple gates.
Now, by staff, what are you referring to?
The rod, the stick,
Okay.
their staff, which was also a representation of their family. They had their family crests on them oftentimes, depending upon how wealthy they were.
These were people of power.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
And they brought them to the temple, and nothing happened. And a voice came out of the Holy of Holies in the temple and said, "He who has not brought his staff is the one to be chosen." So they scoured the countryside looking for the person who was to be betrothed to the Virgin Mary. Come to find out, one of the few people that had been excluded was Joseph himself. He had already been married. He had been a widower, was a rich man, and they asked him to bring his staff. And when he brought his staff, a flower sprouted out of the staff, and a dove landed on his shoulder, and whammo bammo, the betrothal was on.
I thought we were dealing in historical fact here. You want me to believe that something grew out of the staff?
I'm suggesting to you that record exists. Whether or not the actual story is real, history is full of tales that are difficult to understand. I'm telling you that actual document does exist in history.
Okay. And then let's go back a little bit. By the way, is that story you say is not in the Bible?
No, it's not in the Bible at all.
Let's go back again to Mary then. She was 14 years of age, and she got married, I guess. Is that it, to Joseph?
She got betrothed.
Betrothed. That's different than being married. And was she married to Joseph at the time that she conceived?
No, she was not. When Joseph was away on a building project, he was out of town for 3 months. When he came back, he found her with child, and then the great biblical story clicks in that he wanted to put her away privately, but an angel told him not to do that, and he opted to marry her instead. It was a matter of honor for him, and obviously the events surrounding his selection process motivated him to do that. And they didn't have Cadillacs in those days, but she had the finest donkey in the land, and they went to Bethlehem to pay their taxes. And en route, Mary, there's a great story about Mary going into labor, which is also in my book. En route, she went into labor, and she told Joseph had his son James with him at that time, and he told James to watch over her while he went and found a midwife to help deliver the baby. And so Joseph went to find a midwife, and she sat in a cave at that point in time, waited for Joseph to return.
Saying this was not a stable and it was a cave.
Well, if you've been in Jerusalem and you've been in Bethlehem,
yes,
many of the stables were caves, sides of hills, etc., etc.
Okay, well, when you see a creche, for example, it never depicts it as that.
It doesn't, and that's where our common tradition and the realities of the facts differ in that sense of the word. They did go eventually the next day after the birth of Jesus to the inn. Joseph could have afforded to buy the inn at the time, but there were so many visitors from out of town, and there were so few rooms that they opted to take room at the stable. He wouldn't have been offered room at the stable had he not been politically powerful and influential anyway. But anyway, there was this great story of the midwife who delivered the baby Jesus, and that story's been around for 2,000 years and included in my book. And it's a real fascinating story. This lady, Salome, eventually became a servant of the family, obviously implicating once again that the family was wealthy, and followed them the rest of their life. And in fact, Salome went with the Virgin Mary, escaped Jerusalem after the crucifixion, and went to England with her, where she died as well.
So the historical record does indicate there was a crucifixion, right?
Absolutely.
And what happened? Jesus came back historically?
Well, we have that is a huge question.
I asked the big ones here. Go ahead.
Yeah. There are many, many, many documents that talk about the sightings of the resurrected Jesus. As a matter of fact, in my second book, which has not yet been released, Pilate...
Pontius Pilate?
Pontius Pilate, his wife, Claudia Procula, had converted to Christianity, or converted to Judaism at this point in time. She was the granddaughter of Tiberius Caesar. She had kept Pilate informed for all of his life about this Jesus character, and she was very fascinated. Was a fledgling disciple, I suspect. Anyway, at the time of the crucifixion, she went out in the street, was upset over the events of the earthquakes and the tremblings and the darkness, etc., and she saw the resurrected Jesus, according to the ancient manuscripts. She went home and told Pontius Pilate, hey, I saw the guy you crucified walking the streets. And Pilate took an armed guard of 50 men, it scared him to death, took an armed guard of 50 men, went out into the streets and met with this resurrected Jesus and had a conversation with him, which is also recorded in an ancient manuscript, which we have very good copies of. He took a scribe with him, and that dialogue between the resurrected Jesus and Pontius Pilate is recorded in my second book. That manuscript is in the book.
So you're saying there is historical evidence that somebody literally saw Jesus return?
Yes. In fact, Pilate's not the only story. There are hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts that describe his 40-day ministry with his apostles and various visits with him in known places around the world.
Okay, well, Glenn, when we come back after the break, I'm going to want to talk about Judas. I want to talk about, I guess, Pontius Pilate. I want to talk about just a lot of things here that, verify what's in the Bible, but from a totally different point of view.
Exactly.
And how come we never heard about Jesus' background? I mean, talking about his early days. Why has this been kept from us?
Well, obviously, the Bible before the Bible was a book called The Only Rule of Our Faith, which was the writings of Jesus' brothers about the family. The Bible came into existence with the Great Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D., but this book that was written, or these collection of manuscripts that were written by Jesus' brothers, were totally excluded from the Bible. And they are the ones that talk about the Virgin Mary and about Jesus' early life and about the family and the real nature of the family itself from a very personal perspective. And those documents are available today.
Glenn, thank you very much for sharing this hour with us. And on the other side, we will get other Bible stories from a historical point of view. On Coast to Coast AM, the Art Bell Show, and you'll hear Art in the next hour. This is Hilly Rose. This is the Art Bell Show. I am Hilly Rose. We are talking tonight about the historical facts surrounding Jesus. We're talking with Glenn Kimball, who has spent 25 years researching the files of the Vatican and other places around the world, and he says you can go almost any library and get some of this information. And I want to reemphasize that we are not taking a point of view about the Bible. The information that we are presenting tonight, what we are giving you, is historical fact that literally supports the Bible. So I'm not trying to get interpretations or who said what and what the biblical interpretations can be. That's a big discussion all its own. We are only dealing with fact here. Now, Glenn, I want to bring you back in here and indicate that, because I haven't done that yet, you're the author of Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus. You've got another book that's coming out shortly about King Arthur. Is that correct?
No, the second book is called The Hidden Politics of the Crucifixion.
Oh, okay.
And I'm in the middle of writing the book about King Arthur because he plays an important role in this entire saga as well.
It's amazing, isn't it?
The world was much smaller at one time.
Yeah, that's true, and that's why it's all interrelated. I mentioned Judas earlier, and what is the real story of Judas?
Well, Judas was a childhood friend of Jesus. Obviously, the biblical stories don't talk a lot about his childhood and who he played with, etc. But Jesus was, in fact, Judas was a childhood friend of Jesus, and there's some very interesting ancient manuscripts which talk about. They're not cute little stories. Apparently, Judas was not a real well-behaved child, but nonetheless,
that figures.
Nonetheless, Jesus befriended him, and they were childhood playmates. And that story obviously is in the book, and apparently Jesus knew of his attitude long before the events of the crucifixion.
Yeah, that always sort of amazed me that if Jesus was otherworldly, as it were, or the Son of God, why didn't he know that Judas was going to do this? To betray him?
Well, you're asking me an opinion there.
No, I'm asking you a historic opinion.
Historically, Jesus claimed he knew all of the things that were going to happen to him, and we can refer to another example. Jesus and Pontius Pilate knew each other before the crucifixion events. They knew of each other. They exchanged passwords from the great Druid University where Pilate was educated, and that those passwords were used to enter the great educational debates in England. And as I told you earlier in the former hour, Jesus' family had been in self-imposed exile in England, with the safest place in the world, and that's where his grandmother was born, was in England. And by the way, Pontius Pilate was born in Seville, Spain, and was educated, coincidentally, in England, very near where the family of Jesus owned their mines, very near where many of the events of Jesus' family took place. And there's little doubt now that part of the reluctance of Pontius Pilate to crucify Jesus was because he knew of the family and well respected the family, and didn't want to do this to a family that he well respected from his early college days.
Well, I'm hearing everything you're saying, and by the way, we should indicate that according to you, Jesus was not the son of a carpenter, a poor carpenter, but there was part of a not royalty exactly, but very wealthy and very influential.
Actually, it was royalty. He was directly in line for the throne of David, which was, by the way, deposed in the 6th century B.C. And by the time of the birth of Jesus, the reigning monarchy was the Hebrew dynasty, or the dynasty of Herod and his family.
Okay, what I wanted to ask you was, if I'm to accept these various things that you're saying, and we have the story of Mary riding in on a donkey, how did all these people get from Spain to England? They didn't have jets in those days, so it doesn't quite hang together.
Well, I'm so glad you asked that brilliant question. That is a brilliant question. We have to remember that in the times of Jesus, that one of the secrets to the entire ancient world was that boats could travel 40 times farther in a day than a camel could. And so those who had access to the great sailing vessels were the ones that did most of the traveling. And in fact, Jesus' family, being as wealthy as they did, owned fleets of merchant vessels that they used in their family business, and that's how Jesus got around, was on the boats of his great uncle Joseph of Arimathea. And there are thousands of scholars who have come out today and talked about traveling by boat at that particular era in time. In fact, many of them have talked about specifically the journey between Palestine and England as being a reasonably common occurrence, the travel between through the gates of Gibraltar to England was a very common event, especially for merchant traffic, because there were many products and services available in England that were useful to the Roman Empire itself.
Before I forget here, and I want to go on and talk about what happened to the family after Jesus' crucifixion, but you have a website, or is this yours or somebody else's?
It's my website. It's
Ancient Manuscripts?
AncientManuscripts.com. Very easy to remember. It is also the home of the Ancient America magazine, which chronicles all the things that have happened in the last couple of years in terms of archaeology on this hemisphere. It's wonderful. And you'll be absolutely amazed at the things that they have found in this country, which link this country to Europe long before the Normans or long before Christopher Columbus ever came to this country.
I realized you want a little cliffhanger there, but can you give me a clue? What are you talking about?
Well, we found in recent years Roman coins in this country. In my new book, The Hidden King, which talks about King Arthur, King Arthur was a mining king, obviously took his mining experience from the family. He was a descendant of the House of David or the family of Jesus, who owned the mines in England. And these people were interested in a specific product called gold, and gold was prevalent in the Americas, and they did a great deal of mining here. And the Ancient America magazine it chronicles much of the excavations in the last couple of years that are excavations of mines that have occurred. They found artifacts, coins, tools, records, writings, clothing, all kinds of things in the Americas, which link the Americas with Europe from as old as the Phoenicians in 600 BC, and it's a startling story. However, this is not new news because they've been excavating Roman vessels off the coast of Brazil in the last 2 years from the first century AD. How did the Roman vessels get off the coast of Brazil in the first century AD? If they weren't sailing there, they weren't blown off course. They went there deliberately to do merchant traffic with the Americas.
Okay, so you're saying they came up the river, they went through the Mediterranean, out through the gates of Gibraltar, and then out into the sea?
That's correct,
And
sir.
in those years, that many years ago, they were able to transverse the ocean?
There's many scientists which are hot on this trail. Yes, that's exactly true. As a matter of fact, the oceanographic ability of the ancient world was better than the oceanographic ability of the Dark Ages or the 12th century AD. My good friend Gunnar Thompson, who also has a good book on the website, discusses that in his book, where he actually has a copy of the map that Christopher Columbus used to discover the Americas, and coincidentally, it has the Americas on it. I would love to have a discovery where I had a map to find it, you know.
You're trying to tell me that Columbus did not discover America. He was not the first one.
Columbus discovered the colonization of America. He did not discover the actual continent, because the continent had been discovered long ago, was a place where they went to find gold, principally. That was the attraction of the Americas. As a matter of fact, King Arthur, in some of his writings, says that he had a secret treasure house in a place west of England, which he called the Mericas, or the Americas, which is, for someone to have written that from the 6th century AD, is absolutely raises the hair on the back of your head.
Well, there sure were a lot of people who wrote stuff down in those years.
The numbers of ancient manuscripts, people think that from the discovery of the great Dead Sea Scrolls in the Nag Hammadi Library, that the number of ancient texts is maybe a handful, maybe a few hundred. That is absolutely incorrect. There are millions. I am tracking right now on my books over 1 million documents, ancient texts from the time of Jesus and before.
Tell me about... There's so many things I want to ask you, and you obviously have done your research. But what about Joseph of Arimathea? Because we're going to go to calls after the break, so I sort of want to get this in. What is the story here?
Well, Joseph of Arimathea was the great uncle of Jesus. He was the brother of Saint Anne, or the Virgin Mary's mother. Joseph of Arimathea was born in Mararica, Egypt. And he was often called Joseph of Mararica, but he lived in Arimathea. He actually had palatial mansions around the world, and including those in England. And after the death of Jesus' earthly father, Joseph, under law, the nearest relative was to provide and protect the family. And since this was a wealthy and powerful family, the wealthy and powerful great-uncle took over the protectorship of the family. And as you note in the Bible, Jesus was taken from the cross by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus and buried in the family tomb. That is a biblical reference for those who are well-read in the Bible. And we often think that Joseph of Arimathea was some stranger or somebody not associated with the family. That is not true. Joseph of Arimathea was the acting father of Jesus for the majority of his young adult life. And is also the patron saint of England. St. Joseph is extremely well known throughout the world, especially in the Catholic world, and is probably the figurehead, the originator of much of the politics, much of the royal bloodlines, much of the discussion of history in England itself.
Glenn, you may not have the answer to this question, but I sure would like to ask it. There's all this history, factual history that you are bringing to light. Why was the Bible written? What was the purpose of the Bible?
The Bible was really an arbitrated book. It was settled. There was a great argument between the great Arius in the 3rd century A.D. and the local fragmented churches around the world. There were more Christian churches at the time after the death of Jesus than there are today. The Great Council of Nicaea was arranged to settle the disputes. And the most popular books that were in the churches, remember, they didn't have Gutenberg presses or Xerox machines, so all of these churches had different sets of libraries, and they argued which library was the best and who had the most and who had the most credible things. So the Great Council of Nicaea, by the way, sat over by Constantine the Caesar himself, who was actually a descendant of Jesus. He was Jesus's family. He was a descendant of the house of David, and also a relative of King Arthur, by the way. So the Bible that we have is really a composite of a group of documents that were voted on. The Bible could not have been all of the books that were there, because we have so many thousands of books that were excluded, and thousands of books that were revered in the early centuries, in the 1st and 2nd century A.D., and were held as scripture in the early Christian churches. We know, for example, that there are hundreds of letters of Paul, only a few of which were adopted in the canon, and the most popular letters were there in the canon.
So you're saying this whole thing was voted on by the clergy?
That's correct. It was an amalgamation of documents, and it was a voted on compromise to some extent.
All right, we will continue, and we'll open our phone lines, and we will talk more about these amazing stories of the times of Jesus. I am Hilly Rose, in for Art Bell.
Stay tuned to Coast AM with Art Bell from the Kingdom of Nye, and your calls coming up.
And you can talk to Art Bell starting Wednesday of next week. Meanwhile, I'm Hilly Rose, and my guest is Glenn Kimball. And Glenn, I should ask you about this book of yours, Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus. Is this available in local bookstores?
It is around the country, but if you don't, it's upon request for those stores that don't have it. The largest distributor in the world, which has access to 90% of the bookstores in the country. You can request it at your local bookstore and get it, or you can come to our website, ancientmanuscripts.com, or one of the great internet bookstores, which I'm not sure I should mention. But
you mean Amazon?
Amazon.com has
Sure.
it.
Okay.
Just look up Glenn Kimball, and it'll take you right there, and you'll see some of the reviews of the books. And it's 5-star reviews across the board. It's exciting.
Okay, there's 2 N's in Glenn, right?
There's 2 N's in Glenn.
All right. I asked you a question, then I never, let you answer it. So before I go to my phone calls, let's get back to that one question. And that is, you sort of told us part of the answer, but what happened to the faithful followers of Jesus after the crucifixion?
Most of them left town in what what historians have called the Great Exodus of the Faithful in 36 A.D. They had to get out of town because of the persecution of the Romans at that point in time, and that's a story in and of itself why they came to persecute the people who were paying them taxes. Palestine at that moment in time was the goose that laid the golden egg for the Romans, but they had to get out of town. And they went in a lot of different directions. James, the brother of Jesus, and Thomas stayed in Palestine. Peter and the rest of the apostles traveled the world, and especially one of their hidden sanctuaries was in England itself, where the Virgin Mary was. And those histories are prevalent, numerous. There's thousands of them.
Well, what's really fascinating to me is that all of these people, in many ways, are interrelated or actually related, and it's all people who are wealthy, even though we sort of get the impression from the Bible that they're all poor folks.
No, they were extremely wealthy. This was the throne of David we're talking about here. Jesus was the direct heir to the throne of David, which was deposed when the Babylonians came in the 6th century. However, that kingdom, that throne, was expected to return to power at some moment in time. And so the monarchy, even though they were in self-imposed exile, were very much, they took their money with them, and they were very much looked with respect on by the rest of the the Palestinian community then and throughout the centuries.
All right, Glenn, we'll go to open line, not open line, I guess, but to the folks who want to talk to you. And I sort of beg you folks, we're not here to argue about biblical interpretation. We're talking about records that have come down through the centuries and talk about the facts. So if you want to talk about that, great, but I don't want to hear, somebody's interpretation of the Bible. That's not at all what we're about. Let's go directly to a first-time caller line in Cincinnati, Ohio, and John. Good morning to you, John.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Glenn, I'll make a comment, and then I'll get off the air and listen on the radio. Have you run into anything in your researches of your manuscripts about the possible immortality of Jesus? That is to say, if he hadn't been crucified, would he have died a normal death? Thank you.
That's the first time that question's ever been asked of me. To be very candid with you, I haven't taught. There has been no supposition in the ancient manuscripts. Largely, they are historical in nature. Those that were very religious in orientation are few and far between. I can't answer that question.
Well, I think the answer is no.
The answer is no, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let's move along to the wild card line and talk with Jason in San Diego. Good morning, Jason.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Real quickly, first off, Hilly, you're doing an excellent job, and it's very nice to hear you in Art's position.
Thank you.
And Glenn Campbell, I wish I could say my last name on the air so we could be more familiar with
it's Glenn
both
Kimball, by the way, Kimball, okay?
Yes, sir. He has a strong internet presence from what I'm aware of.
Right.
And an interesting printout on the net, the full version of the Enuma Elish, and I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find the correlations extremely interesting that you brought up, and I'm hoping you'll touch on it later as you progress with this, but how the Sumerian texts and all the ancient antiquities that predate the Old Testament and the New Testament that derive the same stories. And just wanted to put out there for the public notice that Zacharias Sitchin is on tour currently and will be in San Diego and other spots in November. And I'd like to give the website of just the information. It's really quickly.
Okay, I really can't do that. Otherwise we'd have everybody calling in and saying, let me publicize my event.
But visit my website and send me an email, and we'll get it on our site.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go east of the Rockies and talk to Larry in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Good morning.
Hello.
Yes, Larry.
Hilly.
Yeah.
Great job you're doing.
Thank you.
Mr. Kimball.
Yes, sir.
Congratulations on your research.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to get your book and read it. To tell you the truth, I hadn't run across it, but I will. I visited the Gospel Commons on the website. Couple of questions, and then I'll get off the air. Are you familiar with the confusion over the modern-day word that they use of Jew and the Old World definitions? The people's names, the Hebrews, the Edomites, the Ayudi, and another thing on the Judas Iscariot, about Iscariot being where he's from.
Well, you're asking an extremely broad question that we could do a whole 2-hour show on.
Okay. Well,
but yes, the Edomites were the home of the great Essenes, and I say that because that's where we get our great discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah, Herod and his family were from there.
That's correct too, and Herod was a Jew, but he made a political alliance with Rome, and that's why he was in power at the time of Jesus' life. His father Herod the king had made that pact with Julius Caesar, and his adopted son, Herod Antipas the first, very much was aware of that. So, interesting comment.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. And let's go west of the Rockies to John in Denver, Colorado. Hi, John.
Glenn?
Yes.
Glenn, good morning.
Good morning.
Fascinating show. You did a lot of research. Let me ask you a question. I studied the ancient Vedic scripts of India known as the Vedas for the last 20 years, and, the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, which is about 5,000 years old. I'm wondering, in your research, have you at all come, the Vedas target Lord Sri Krishna as the absolute God, absolute truth, whatever, and I've been told that Christ imbibed some of that in his travels with his uncle, and he went to India, and it translated into his ministry, portions of it. Have you, in your research, come across anything where Christ actually went to India?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, Jesus spent about 3 years there, and Jesus is quoted firsthand in the Vishnu Purana and the Rishvidas. He is, in other words, he is quoted firsthand because he was there. One of the Magi, in fact, was from India, who visited Jesus at his birth and went home and never became a Christian, by the way. He returned to his home and said, Jesus, our Messiah, is on his way. And when Jesus lived in India, he was celebrated with great festivals. And everybody, if you go to India today, it's common language in the street that Jesus visited India and lived in India, and yet in the Western Hemisphere, we know nothing about it.
Well, he did that, yet he was a relatively young man when he died. So was this after his resurrection or before?
No, this was during his mortal ministry. First of all, the age of Jesus is very much in question here. If Dionysius Ignatius, as we talked about earlier, goofed on the calendar by 7 years, we know Jesus died in the year 33 A.D., but in fact, he was born in the year 7 B.C., which means that he was 40 years old when he died. And by the way, that is recorded that in the Messiah text, the ancient Messiah text, that the Messiah himself would die on his 40th birthday, or around his 40th birthday. And so much of our folklore about Jesus being 33 when he died is totally inaccurate. Jesus was in his 40s and did, in fact, do a great deal of his ministry around the world earlier in his youth. We could get into a huge discussion about that, but 40 is a number that is very prominent in the Messiah text and ancient Jewish lore. 40 days it rained for Noah, and 40 days he fasted. 40 was the number associated with the Messiah forever and ever. Throughout the ancient world, the number 40 is a number that's predominant in the Bible, and people don't know why people use the word 40. But the reason why they used the year 40 was because it was in the similitude of their Messiah that was going to appear.
So as we discussed in the earlier hour, the millennium that we're approaching really has already happened, and everybody's out celebrating for no good reason.
I think there's a good reason to celebrate all the time.
Okay.
Me and you.
Absolutely. Move on. All right, we're talking with Glenn Kimball, and it's not Glenn Campbell, but Glenn Kimball, and we will continue right after these amazing messages. Rose in for Art Bell, whom you can talk to next Wednesday, and our guest is Glenn Kimball. And let's go on the first-time caller line to Randy in Boise, Idaho. Good morning, Randy.
Hi, Hilly. How you doing?
Terrific.
I've got a question for Glenn. Pertaining to the Savior, his wife and children, is there any information as to whether they went to Great Britain also? And I'll just listen on the air. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Absolutely stupendous question. The family of Jesus was very much under protectorship. People, we could talk about the ladies and not the ladies. I shouldn't say it that way. That's probably not an appropriate way to say that. But Jesus was followed by an entourage of women during his time, and there was a great conflict between Peter and Jesus over this particular issue. And Mary Magdalene herself, in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which, by the way, we have very, very good copies thanks to recent discoveries, explores that conflict between Peter and Mary Magdalene in front of Jesus. And Peter said at one point in time, he said, you almost think that you love her more than you love us. And Jesus turned to him, and I can feel a sense of humor in Jesus himself. He says, that's not the question. The question is why do I love her more than I love you? But yes, the actual personal family of Jesus did have to escape after the crucifixion. There was a tremendous problem with the Sadducean authorities at that particular moment in time, who usurped the authority of the Sanhedrin. And yeah, they had to get out of town. And yes, they did go to England on the boats of the family of Jesus. And yes, they lived and died there.
Let's go to the wild card line and talk to Jerry in San Diego. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Hi, Haley. You're doing a fabulous job. You
Thank
have
you.
a great program tonight.
Mhm.
And I miss Art Bell, too. Anyways, I would like to ask Mr. Kimball. He stated earlier that Jesus, it says somewhere, that Jesus was the Savior of many worlds. And I was wondering if he ever thought about the face on Mars resembling the face on the Shroud of the Turan. And
Boy, you're out of my element on that question. I am very much a historian in that respect, and in terms of speculation on that level, I really haven't done any speculation.
Okay, well, I've seen those photos, and even if I accept the early photos, they had other flybys later on, and NASA says, no, there's not a face at all. But even if I accept the face, that doesn't look to me like the Shroud of Turin.
It didn't?
No, not to me, anyway. Does it look that way to you?
Well, I noticed it in the paper, in the San Diego paper.
Did they have an overlay of the...
Not an overlay, but they had, when the shroud was on display, more or less, back months ago, and at the same time they were going and taking pictures over, over that terrain of Mars, and they showed a picture of the face that was pretty clear, and they both resembled each other. I was wondering...
Can I throw in an interesting side note here?
Go ahead.
People have searched for artifacts of Jesus for many, many centuries. In fact, a very famous man in our time called John Lennon spent half of his life looking for the spear that lanced the side of Jesus, and that's not a commonly known fact, and yet it's certainly the case. He writes, John Lennon wrote about it, and there's some speculation that he either found the spear that lanced the side of Jesus, or he knew where it was just before his death. That's an interesting a contemporary note on artifacts. But at the great destruction of the temple of Herod in 70 A.D., most of the artifacts were carried to the Pyrenees Mountains by the Romans. They didn't melt them down and turn them into gold bullion. They left a pillar at the site of the destruction of the temple of Herod, explaining their actions for the destruction. And amazingly, their rationale for destroying the temple of Herod was to vindicate Jesus. And you have to ask yourself one question: why would the Romans want to vindicate Jesus?
I was going to ask you that question.
That is a subject in my book. Why, in fact, they wanted to vindicate Jesus? Because the letters of Pontius Pilate and Tiberius Caesar and Herod himself talk about the reasons why. As a matter of fact, there's a story in my second book that's up and coming about Pontius Pilate himself joining the Christian movement and being killed as a result of that movement. In the Praetorium of Tiberius Caesar himself, and the reason for his beheading at that moment in time was because he allowed Jesus to be crucified. Tiberius Caesar had sent a letter to his granddaughter, which is very famous, very well recorded, telling her to bring Jesus to Rome because he was ill and wanted the man who could heal with the word of his mouth to come to Rome and heal him of his affliction. And that didn't get done in time before the crucifixion happened, and I'll tell you right now, it made Tiberius Caesar very, very angry that he didn't get a chance to get the healing of Jesus. Those correspondences never arrived in time.
All right, let's go to Seneca, Kansas. David, good morning. David, are you there?
Good morning, Haley.
Yes, sir.
I'm calling to talk to Glenn on the subject of the death, the burial, and the place of burial of the Most Holy Lady Mother of God. I'm a reader in the Orthodox Church, and we take our teachings of the Fathers down from the time of those who were the Fathers who were taught by the Apostles. And according to our teachings, the Mother of God reposed in Jerusalem.
In Dormington. That's a very common story.
No, in Jerusalem, not Dormington.
Well,
her dormition took place in.
That's a common story, and I'm not going to try and dispute or conflict over people's tradition with regard to where the Virgin Mary is buried. However, there is abundant evidence, and you need to pick up a copy of my book, as to where, in fact, she is laid to rest. And that has been obviously a big quest, is the search for the Holy Grail. And we're getting very close. In fact, we're not only getting very close, but many of the scholars in the world today have it pinpointed exactly where she's buried. And, in fact, it happens to be the cemetery where the royal families of Europe have been buried for centuries, to be buried next to the Virgin Mary. It's been a well-kept secret. You can't buy a plot in the cemetery. You can't access it. It's not for public information. It's not on the tour routes for a deliberate reason, and hasn't been that way for hundreds of years.
All right, Glenn, thanks so much, and we'll chat with you on the other side of the break and take more of your phone calls here. I am Hilly Rose, sitting in for Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM.
We continue with your calls to Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM in just a moment.
Certain parts of Jerusalem, the very, very, very religious, probably would persecute somebody just like Jesus.
Well, we got to understand that it was Jewish law that marriage was a sacred sacrament, and for the leader of the Jews not to have thought that was important in his life, or for us to think that it wasn't important in his life, is simply a myth. The concept of celibacy originated from some of the comments of Peter, though Peter himself was married. The concept of celibacy was formalized in the 8th century A.D. and was not a concept of the early Jewish communities.
Good heavens, history repeats itself into modern day, doesn't it?
Without doubt.
All right. We will continue here and take more of your phone calls for Glenn Kimball after these words. In for Art Bell, we're talking with Glenn Kimball about the actual historical times, the historical records of the life of Jesus, and all the various players that you know about from the Bible, but they all existed. And so those of you who say, oh, the Bible's just a bunch of fairy tales, got to look at history, friends. It really, it happened. It's there. And if you've ever been to the Holy Land, you know it does. Let's go to the wild card line and talk with David in St. Louis. Hi, David.
Hello, Mr. Kimball. It's a very, very interesting show. Thank you for being a guest tonight.
Thank you.
Do any of the writings that you've seen shed any light on the use of the sacred Hebrew names, like Yahweh or the Messiah's name Yahshua? And I wanted to know, because if that is the case, is it true, do you think, that the Messiah, his followers, were persecuted by the priests in charge of the temple worship because they used the sacred names?
Well, you need to go to my site and go under click on the pictures, and you'll see that we have the ancient Hebrew symbol for God, which is Yahweh. Anyone that wants to have the actual photograph of that inscription should go to the website, and you'd see it there. Yes, they were persecuted because of the use of the name of God. Obviously, the name of God was sacred to them from the time of Moses, because it was associated with the powers of the priesthood at that moment in time. And for all of you who are Kabbalists out there, Kabbalahism, for example, for those of you who don't know anything about the Kabbalah, were the records from the Temple of Solomon about the use of the name of God and the powers associated with the use of the name of God. And so it was, in fact, a very sacred term, not to be used lightly, not to be used at all in most cases. And you're very correct. There is a huge body of literature to this effect, and you're going to love reading the book and following the history and the discoveries.
Why don't you give that website again?
AncientManuscripts.com.
Okay, let's go on the first-time caller line to the land of UFOs and atomic bombs and all that kind of stuff. Joe in Socorro, New Mexico. Hi, good morning.
It's the land of enchanted trash, though. Socorro, New Mexico.
You said it,
morning,
not me.
Glenn. How are you doing?
Good.
Very good.
I've got a couple of questions. Oh, by the way, I want to thank you for mentioning about Pontius being blackmailed. I've always had that impression just from reading the book of John.
Without doubt. If you look at the last verse in the Gospel of John, it says that many things Jesus did, I suppose if they were all written, the world could not contain all the books that should be written.
The very last verse.
John was the best friend of Jesus, and there is a lot of story. When I first started the research, I thought I'd find a few nibbles, But let me tell you, there's an ocean of information, an absolute ocean of information.
Oh, you bet you. I have a question, or a couple of questions actually, concerning how you document or authenticate your research. I would imagine that with a large number of documents that you have to find inconsistencies or contradictions, perhaps, amongst them. And if you do, how do you decide which is truth and which is error?
Okay, good questions.
Absolutely brilliant question. And the way I do it, let me tell you how I do it. I look for cross-references. If a story is told from one perspective, I suspect it. However, if it's told from many different cultures and many different books and many different writings, then I treat it with more credibility. History is always flawed. It's the nature of history itself. However, it also tells the truth, which is also the nature of history itself. An absolutely brilliant question, and that's how I do it.
Okay, so you're saying if there's a conflict, I'm not sure that I the little triangulation here. If there's a conflict, how do you resolve it?
I look at where it's said in numerous different locations. If it's said only once, then I de-emphasize it. If it's said many, many times, I focus on it.
Okay, let's go east of the Rockies to Mujahid in Atlanta, Georgia. Hello?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm enjoying your program, but I have an interesting question. As far as the original books or manuscripts, aren't they originally from the African country? And when you speak of books, I've noticed in the Quran, the Holy Quran, that if you read from the 16th to the 50th verse in the 19th surah or the chapter called Maryam, you'll find some interesting information about Yeshua or Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus, if you will. There's a lot of things I think that people are misconstrued about because of the lack of study of the scriptures in the original text and in the original languages. And I think that a lot of times we misunderstand things because we come from a Eurocentric point of view.
You're such a brilliant... I'm so glad you've been on the air, because we forget the Islam nation. We forget that some of the greatest stories of the childhood of Jesus himself are in the Quran and in the Quran exclusively. However, we got to remember also that many of the writings of the Quran, the sayings in the Quran, actually have identical script from the 1st and 2nd century written by the brothers of Jesus. So whether or not, this is up to your own personal belief, and I don't get into that particular posture myself, but some of the sayings are perhaps were either prophetically given to Muhammad in his chambers, or were in fact researched from ancient manuscripts and put in the Quran. The Quran is a resource beyond measure. Christianity has ignored the Quran, and that is a terrible, terrible tragedy.
Well, we're talking about the fact, it's documented, of course, that there are all these references to Jesus. Since he got around so much, what about other religions? Do they have anything about Jesus?
Without doubt. Jesus is the fulcrum in history for all the major religions. And when I emphasize all, that's going to be kind of a startling statement for people. But Jesus is the prophet for Islam. Jesus is a prophet for the Jew. Jesus is a prophet for the Hindu, quoted in their books. And as a matter of fact, the new discoveries in our decade, or perhaps in the next 2 decades, will come to find out that Jesus and his followers had a significant influence on the Buddhist faith in the Far East. For example, I
haven't got time for the example, but I will the other side of the break, okay? We'll get right back to that point. We're talking with Glenn Kimball, and we shall continue here, Coast to Coast AM, on the Art Bell Show. I am Hilly Rose.
Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell from the Kingdom of Nye continues in just a moment.
Himself. An Eyewitness to Christ is a good example of a book written not by me, but by some very well-known gentlemen who have referred to that particular research.
And in other words, I never knew that Jesus left a record of anything. This is a shock to me.
Well, people think that Jesus was either ignorant or that he never wrote anything, and that is clearly a lie. He wrote many things, and every single one of the documents written by Jesus is absent from the canon.
Well, when we hear the story that he was a poor carpenter, we assume he doesn't have any education.
Well, the stories of his educational pursuits are numerous and many. We have a good story in my book about Jesus' father hiring a tutor. You certainly couldn't hire a tutor in those days if you weren't rich. And Jesus interacting with that tutor, that story makes me smile every time I read it, because Jesus was obviously a brilliant man. If he hadn't have been a religious figure, he could have been the most brilliant man of his day.
All right, we will take a brief pause here and continue with Glenn Kimball right after these words. Continuing our discussions with Glenn Kimball. Glenn, I don't mean to sound stupid here. I guess I do. I just don't understand. We're dealing historical records. You're telling me that Jesus is crucified, the disciples fled, and so what happened to the church after the death of Jesus? Exactly what happened according to historical record?
Well, the church was very fragmented. It was left without a leader, per se. And communication was obviously difficult during that period of time. And so every church, everywhere that the apostles had visited, had their own beliefs, their own traditions, their own libraries, their own sayings. And there were more, as I said earlier in the program, there were more Christian churches after the death of Jesus than there are today, Christian factions. And that's part of the reason for the Great Council of Nicaea was to standardize and formalize a belief under one heading, and it was brought under the control of the Roman Empire, who had the political power and the financial capability to standardize a belief in Jesus. But it was really fragmented at the time of Jesus. And Jesus spoke of that era himself. He said that there would be wolves that would enter the flock, not sparing the sheep. And part of that language was excluded from the final canon because it was very critical of the future controllers of the church. That's part of the reason why the Bible does not contain other documents than it does, is because the rest of the documents were critical of the future written by Jesus, the sayings of Jesus.
Well, why did Caesar allow this to happen? Why did he allow this to continue?
He was an arbitrator. He was a negotiator. He literally negotiated between the warring factions of early Christianity, and actually did a favor to some extent. We'd never have Christianity today if it had not been for the fact that he arbitrated the disputes that were at the time of Jesus, and they settled on a course of action, a body of belief, and standardized the scriptures, threw everything else out that was important, that they thought was not germane or left them in control, and we are left with the remnants of that era of time.
Okay, I got the answer. Thank you very much. Let's go to a first-time caller line and talk with Anthony in Los Angeles. Hi.
Hi, Hilly. I have a comment and a question. My comment is brief. I just want to say that you've done an excellent job. I've been listening all week, and I think in this format you should either have your own show or I mean, you've had your own show, and I've heard you over the years many times, and I think that you've done terrific. You're the guest. These are the best guests I've heard in a long time on Coast to Coast.
Thank you very much.
I really think you've done a terrific job.
What's your
Glenn?
question?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Glenn. My inquiry is to the notion of the second coming. Was there some feeling or some indication of a prophecy or prediction on Jesus' part that he knew that he was going? Did he prophesy what has been told of the second coming?
The answer is a definite yes. He spoke specifically of it. His descendants spoke specifically of it. And as a matter of fact, the lead-lined casket of King Arthur spoke. He said, "I'm going to return with the Messiah at his second coming." And obviously, and from the earlier program, you might have noted that King Arthur himself was of the descendants of the house of David, and obviously a descendant of the family of Jesus himself. So Jesus left those records of his second coming. very clearly with us. We got to note. I want to add one personal thing of myself here for a moment. The great Jewish factions in the world are terrific people. I love them to death. But they missed the first coming of their own Messiah from their own records for a reason. They missed him because they outlawed all of the scriptures except the 5 books of Moses in their synagogues and in Palestine. That was the reason why the priests had to travel to Egypt to retrieve the Old Testament books, because they were outlawed in their own country. And we've made a similar kind of mistake as Christians, in that we hold up our Bible and say this is all the history that there is, and we've refused to look at the fact that there might be more and help us explain this apocalyptic era in which we live. And to be very candid with you, the ancient manuscripts speak more candidly and more clearly about our time than you can possibly imagine, and it's a subject for another program.
Let's go to the wild card line and talk to Randy in Salt Lake City.
Mr. Kimball, after looking up your website here, I'd be foolish to think that you have not done some investigation regarding the Book of Mormon. What is your feeling regarding the Book of Mormon in terms of any physical, archaeological evidence, and how does it tie in or reflect Christ's depiction in it?
I'm going to speak generically about this. In the world today, there are many traditions and many ancient records and bodies of ancient texts which we should not ignore. The Book of Mormon records, as I understand them, are records of the resurrected Jesus. And the sightings of the resurrected Jesus, as we spoke earlier in the program, continued until the 5th century. And if you were to look at the great body of manuscripts out there, you'd find some wonderful discoveries that might help you answer your own question.
All right, let's move along to the west of the Rockies line. Talk to Jack on the beautiful Oregon coast.
Oh, yeah, it is beautiful, as a matter of fact. How are you doing this morning, Hilly? And good evening, or morning, I guess it is, Glenn.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a comment, I guess a comment. Do you intend to, in your lifetime, get a complete compendium of what you feel will be the history of Jesus and what he did through his lifetime?
That's my goal,
okay.
And it's impossible.
From what you've told me, it is, yeah. And I have 2 more questions. One of them is having to do, like I have the Holman Bible, which is one of the better ones. It does not, of course, include the Apocrypha. I'd like to know about that. And also, there was a book discovered by a man named Alcunas, I believe is the way you pronounce it. He was the abbot of Canterbury. It's called the Book of Jasher.
Okay,
I feel with that, sir.
In order to get you an answer, I'm going to have to stop you here. So go ahead, Glenn.
The Book of Jasher is a clear example of books that were mentioned in the Bible but excluded from the Bible in the final vote. Anybody that wants to read the Book of Jasher is going to find out that the Book of Jasher is a wonderful story that should have been included in the Bible.
And was not.
And was not.
Was voted out, right?
Pardon?
It was voted out.
Voted out. It was not popular enough at the time of the canon.
All right. We will take more phone calls in just a few moments on the other side of the break. You please stand by there, Glenn Kimball, and we will pursue the facts surrounding the lifetime of Jesus. I am Hilly Rose, sitting in for Art Bell, who returns on Wednesday.
Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell from the Kingdom of Nye continues in just a moment.
The ancient documents seem to indicate that the idea of multiple existences, not specifically reincarnation from coming back to this earth,
right,
per se, But the fact that people have multiple existences, a pre-existence before they came here, and an existence after they leave here, which is intimately connected with mortality, at least on some dimension. Yes, there's extensive material about that. In fact, I often have made the private comment that the Hindu concept of reincarnation is really a theft from ancient Christian manuscripts.
And my other question?
Yeah, go ahead.
You talked about some of these ancient manuscripts that speak of the prophecies of our times even more clearly than the Scripture itself. Could you give us maybe some sources, or are they on your website? And my other question is, who are the Magi's?
I can't really. I could give you zillions of them, and they'd be unintelligible for the masses here with regards to that. But I'm going to answer your second part of your question, which is probably easier. The Magi were a royal family, much like the royal houses of Europe and England are all tied together. The czars in Germany were related to the French, were related to the English, were related to the Russians. Well, in the ancient world, they had royal families as well that were very much interconnected. And these three Magi were, in fact, royal family members from three different cultures. One of them, apparently from the ancient documents, came from Persia. One of them came from Arabia, and another one from India. And they all had a common interest, and that was the prophecies of the coming king of Israel. They also shared another common practice, which was the practice of astronomy. And because in those days they didn't have calendars, they used the stars to calibrate time. We today go to a calendar, say it's 1998, but in those days they calibrated time largely with the stars as well as a navigational tool. So the Magi were from three different countries. They went home to their own countries, said that the great king of Israel had been born. And largely, they knew that the king was expected. That's an amazing story in itself. How did they know that an Israeli king that had nothing to do with their own culture, nothing to do with their own times, would be born, and why would they go to Bethlehem? That's an amazing story. You need to pick up the book to follow that trend of thought. But the Magi play a critical evidence that the entire world knew that Jesus was going to be born. The entire world knew it. Everybody around the world had spoken of these events, even in his own country. That's why Jesus said that a prophet is without honor in his own country, because he had less respect in his own country than he did around the world.
Okay, you want to give that website once again?
It's ancientmanuscripts.com. And people can pick up the book either at Amazon.com or order it, special order through any bookstore that is connected with Ingram, or they can come to my website and order it from me, and I'll be sure they get a signed copy if they come to my website.
All right, Glenn, just hang in there, please, as we take a small break and continue right here on the Art Bell Show. Billy Rose in for Art Bell until Wednesday when Art returns. And we're talking with Glenn Kimball. Let's go now to the first-time caller line and talk with Joe in Cleveland, Ohio. Good morning, Joe.
Yes, Glenn.
Yes.
I have all your records. They're great.
All right, funny.
No, wait a minute. I have a comment and I have a vital question.
Very good.
My comment is that I find it a very eerie coincidence, or a strange coincidence, that the Nag Hammadi texts were found the same year that this supposed Lord Maitreya surfaced in England. Now, my question, my question is
comment,
this:
by the way.
Do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ?
I don't think that's relevant here.
Yes, it is very relevant.
Why?
You are putting doubts in the minds of a lot of people this evening. Do you believe in the resurrection of Christ?
I don't think you have
Jesus Christ.
Okay, I don't think you have to answer that at all, Glenn. Let's go on, because I've made it very, very clear here that we're not going to talk about the religious aspects. Let's go to the west of the Rockies line, and Dino in Fairbanks, is that Alaska or Arkansas? No, it's got to be Alaska, right?
It's Fairbanks, Alaska.
Okay, go ahead. You're on the air.
I wanted to first mention it's long overdue what you're doing, Glenn.
Thank you very much. I feel so as well.
And I studied to be Greek priest, and I read, write, and speak fluent Greek.
A magnificent obsession.
And I've studied the Interpreter's Bible in the Greek.
a magnificent obsession.
Yes, it is. And I'm a layperson now, and I just, in the original King James, in the 46th Psalm, there's a cryptic. Are you familiar with it?
Off the top of my head, no.
Okay, if you count 46 words in, you get shake.
Oh,
If you count 46 words backwards, you get spear.
Yes,
and I checked the probability on that mathematically, and some mathematicians will say it's coincidental, and others will say it's infinitesimal.
To be very candid with you, the entire book of the Bible itself is very numerologically oriented, and there are many great books out in the market today. I'm not a numerologist myself, but there are many great books out today that talk about the numerological coincidences within the Bible, and that's not my focus is primarily history, but you're absolutely correct. In fact, if you were to there have been people who have taken the Bible and put it into a computer and looked for random patterns and have found all kinds of eerie things. The Jews, to make an interesting story, however, historically speaking, the Jews were very numerologically oriented. As a matter of fact, the number 40, which happens to be the age of the Messiah, has a great significance in Jewish lore, even to this day. The number 33 has no significance whatsoever in Jewish lore, and so we it's part of the evidence of the fact that the ancient texts spoke of the age of Jesus as being the age of 40 when he died.
What about 666? I'm only teasing here.
Well, by the way, you know the letters www on the web. If you use them in Hebrew, the W is the sixth letter. I'm just being absurd here, but that's a coincidence.
Hey, it's as good a conspiracy theory as any. You know?
How do I know?
Yeah.
How do I know?
Okay, let's go back for just a moment because I felt badly about the gentleman I had to cut off. I don't know where he's coming from because there's nothing you're saying that's putting doubts in the minds of people.
No, sir, and occasionally we'll run into people who think that we're putting doubts in people's minds. On the contrary, if they'll listen very closely, there's nothing but vindication for Jesus in this whole event. In fact, of the records that I found nothing to contradict the traditional stories of who he said he was.
Yeah, I feel badly about that because I don't want to challenge anybody's beliefs here, but what you're saying is this is an actual document of what really happened.
Yes, sir.
And what you don't know, you don't know. I mean, whether the resurrection happened or anything of that sort, but indeed you've documented that somebody did see Jesus 4 days after he was crucified. So,
yes, I can tell you that there are manuscripts to that effect. A person's personal beliefs have to be their own. I can tell you the veracity of the existence of the manuscripts, and personal beliefs have to remain personal beliefs.
All right, we will continue after the break with Glenn Kimball, and my name is Hilly Rose, right here on Coast to Coast AM, the Art Bell Show.
Stay tuned to Coast AM with Art Bell and more of your calls coming up.
Art Bell, I am Hilly Rose, and we are talking with Glenn Kimball, not Campbell, Kimball, with a K. And Glenn, I'm sorry I blanked there for a moment. The gentleman asked about the rapture, which you answered, and the other part was that the indication that we will see people who have passed on.
Yes, there's a great body of near-death experience literature, near-death-like experience literature in the ancient text. We can even go back as far as the ancient Greeks. They spoke. Cicero and Plato and people like that spoke prolifically about near-death experience, where they saw their ancestors after death in a near-death-like experience. It's important, though. Here's an interesting historical fact that in my new book I talk about the events of the resurrection, and the ancient prophets were resurrected along with Jesus. Apparently, at least there's a text to that effect that they were resurrected along with Jesus and were walking the streets. And not only were they walking the streets in Palestine and Jerusalem, but there are records to presume that indicate that they were walking, the dead were rising out of the catacombs in Rome, and that was one of the reasons that frightened Tiberius Caesar out of his mind. And that's one of the reasons why he sent for Pontius Pilate personally to account for the people, the walking dead in Rome. And he was looking for an excuse of someone to blame for the destruction and these scary events that were happening in Rome. And the only thing he could think of were the letters from his granddaughter, which reported the man who could heal with the word of his mouth. And when he contacted his granddaughter, she said yes, the dead were walking here in Jerusalem as well. And unfortunately, my husband killed him. And one of the things
killed who?
Allowed him to be killed. Pontius Pilate allowed Jesus to be crucified, and obviously what had happened here is that at that moment in time, Tiberius Caesar focused the blame for these events occurring in Rome on what Pilate had allowed to happen, which was the crucifixion of Jesus. In fact, this is the real reason why Tiberius Caesar went back and began the massacres in Jerusalem right after the death of Jesus, was to vindicate or try to appease the gods, whatever they were, for the death of Jesus. And people have forgotten this historical fact, and yet it's very well recorded in ancient manuscripts.
Before Jesus, what was the religion, if there was a religion?
Well, Judaism was...
Oh, that was the main religion then.
They call it Judaism, but that really is referring to the tribe of the Jews themselves. It was really a Hebrew religion, Hebrew being a word from the 3rd century B.C., and yet we are really talking about the same entity here.
Okay, let's move along and go to east of the Rockies to Attleboro, Massachusetts, and Tom. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Hilly. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Hello, Glenn.
Hello.
I'd like to ask you a question. I don't know, a few questions. I don't know which order I should do this. But you mentioned that Christ did do some writings. Are you familiar with the Pistis Sophia?
Absolutely. Read it many times.
Now this is something that's been interesting me for many, many years. In the Pistis Sophia, certainly, have you read it?
Many times.
Okay, so it's pretty evident that Christ taught reincarnation.
In a form, he taught that we were alive before we came to this earth, and that we, in fact, had some sort of relationship with this earth, and that we will be alive in a real sense after we have died. Yes.
Well, if you remember, there was a certain part where he is talking about justifications and the certain retribution that a soul would have to pay if one was a glutton, or if one that he would be reborn, and the waters of life or the waters of recognition would be kept from him, and he would be born again. Now,
born again, where is the question? And that's the whole controversy over reincarnation, is born again where.
Now, are you familiar with the Fifth Ecumenical Council?
Yes.
Okay, now, up until that time in the church, that was 543 A.D.
Correct.
Is it not true that Justinian pronounced any who was the emperor of the Eastern Empire that he anathematized Origen's teachings? Origen was a church father that taught reincarnation. And up until that time,
he was a eunuch from Egypt,
Greece.
Well, he practiced out of Egypt, but he was a Greek.
Right. So up until
so was
that
Cleopatra,
time,
by the way.
I'm sorry. So, who was?
So was Cleopatra Greek. She was a direct descendant of Alexander the Great.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
But anyway, so up until that time, reincarnation was pretty well accepted by the church. Isn't that true?
No, that's not true.
What about the Gnostics?
Well, the Gnostics, you get into I'm a very, if I were to be a practicing religion, sometimes I classify myself as Gnostic. They believed, like I'm saying, we're probably just bypassing each other in words, but there was a form of reincarnation in the sense that we had a life before we came to this life, and it was very much we were very much a family of the children of God, and that we will pass on to another life where we will have an opportunity to atone for our sins or make amends or whatever it happens.
You're not quoting the Bible here. You're talking about these
I'm talking about ancient manuscripts.
Okay, just want to be sure. Let's go to the wild card line and talk with Ann in Kansas City. Good morning, Ann.
Bingo. The Gnostics is considered to be a heresy by Catholics, Christians, Catholics. I'm Catholic. I think that's the direct descendants.
That's correct.
Of Jesus. Now, the Gnostics, before the time of Christ, were reviled by the Roman philosophers because they falsified ancient documents, and they had a love of the truth that the Romans philosophers did and couldn't bear this. And the Mormons also have this same tradition. So that ties into your Gnosticism.
Well, Gnostic...
And it's just a Babylonian mystery religion.
Well, let me explain Gnosticism to you for a moment. I know very well what the Catholics believe about Gnosticism, and to be honest with you,
You have censored out the Gnostic gospel, where Jesus raises a young man from the dead and goes in and has sex with him. Now, St. Jude Thaddeus railed against these liars at the time of Christ.
Well,
and
I have to continue. I have to finish my comment about Gnosticism. Gnosticism is an interesting phenomenon because you are correct that the ending condition of Gnosticism was really a blast. It was an orgy-ridden. Didn't resemble anything to do with Christianity in its final entity. And the reason is because the Gnostics believed that religion came in your heart, and they reviled organizations. They believed that the church was an adjunct or an assistant to a person's spiritual progress, rather than trying to control or lead the process. However, in its inception, the Gnostics were very Christian. They believed in Jesus. As a matter of fact, Jesus walked among the Gnostics or the Essenes, talked amongst them, taught amongst them, wore their garb. Many of the precious documents we have today with regards to the writings of the Brothers of Jesus are classified Gnostic, when in reality they're not Gnostic at all.
Okay.
They are.
I've really got to stop you here because we have to go over the next hour. Can you hang with us for the next hour?
Sure. Okay,
look forward to it. We will continue here on the Art Bell program. I'm Hilly Rose.
You're hearing Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell from the Kingdom of Nye.
To be very candid with you, they accepted him long before the Jews did from ancient records. Like I told you, the Norsemen, not specifically the Norsemen, but the Druids themselves, built a temple in Jerusalem in before the 2500 year BC era, in expecting their own Messiah to return. And that they called his name Jesus at that particular moment of time. In fact, they're the only documents that I have that actually called him by name. So that's interesting. Obviously, the Norsemen had contact with England, and Jesus wasn't taught by the Druid faith. Actually, it seems to me from the documents I've read, he actually taught the Druids in their own tongue. Probably lectured a long time in the Great Druid University that had 60,000 students at the time of Jesus. Jesus was an educator. He was somebody who spoke and was a well-respected guest speaker at these kind of events. And so someone to think that maybe the Druids taught Jesus, I would think that you'll find in the ancient manuscripts that quite the reverse is true. Jesus spoke at their gatherings and was their guest speaker and their honored guest.
And any references to Atlantis at all?
Atlantis is a modern term that we use in our colloquial language to refer to a missing continent. yes, there are records that talk about missing continent and the sinking of great parts of the world into the ocean. We now have great archaeologists that are off the coast of Japan right now searching at those great ruins at 200 and 300 feet depth in the oceans. And those archaeological, they have ancient traditions about who those people were. In terms of ancient texts, with regard to Jesus specifically, no, I'm not familiar with any.
And gods and goddesses, any reference to that?
Absolutely. If you look in there's a great feminine presence. We do often talk about Father in heaven. The ancients often talked about Mother in heaven, and all references with regard to women and women deity or women in heaven alongside God the Father were deleted in the 2nd century AD in the great book burnings of the Roman Empire. I think it was a sad thing because many of the sweet messages of this feminine presence in the heavens, people call it a goddess. I don't think that that's quite the correct terminology. But certainly there was a feminine presence in the heavens of the ancient world, and she left much good counsel for us today. We've become a sexist society since the 2nd century. We've deleted all the books written by and about women in the great book burnings, and I think it's a tragedy because many of the great women in history, in scriptural and religious history, wrote some of the sweetest documents that are in existence.
All right, we'll continue with Glenn Kimball in just a moment after these messages. Billy Rose in for Art Bell, who'll be back with you on Wednesday. And let's go to the first-time caller line, talk with Jeff in Memphis, Tennessee. Hi, Jeff.
How you doing? Good show tonight, Mr. Rose.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to have such a good scholarly guest on your show.
It sure is.
I have a question that's kind of an age-old philosophical question about free will. I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on that.
From historical
records? As far as documents go, because about free will as far as, about the existence, well, it's kind of hard to really explain.
Well, I think we understand it, but I'm not, Glenn, is there anything in the documents about that?
About free will?
Yeah.
Actually, free agency, that's my term. That's not the ancient term. But the independence of mortal life, that we were designed to be here with an agency of our own, is a common theme in ancient manuscripts across the board. And we have, apparently, from those documents, it suggests that one of the reasons for mortality itself is to first of all, experience free agency, and second of all, to learn how to govern it and use it wisely.
Well, one thing I just don't, it's always been puzzling to me, is I'm brought up Catholic, and we were always taught that God is omniscient. Yeah. And that he's all-knowing, all-perfect, all-caring. But there's a problem that kind of conflicts with free will, that why would he create a being as man and give him the choice on what decisions to make, and then when his life comes to a bitter end as far as death, and then you would, as far as afterlife, be condemned to hell. When he created you and he knew what you were going to do in your life, why would he even make you if, that's kind of cyclic, but...
Yeah, well, it's, I think, more a religious or a philosophical question, but do you have any comment at all, Glenn?
Well, Elaine Pagels wrote a great book called The Origin of the Devil. This gentleman would benefit greatly by reading her book. Elaine is a friend from a distance of mine, and I think she had a very interesting comment saying that our use of the word devil is really more modern than ancient. And I'll leave it to her to explain that particular one to you. She does it better than I do. I could speak philosophically with you, but I can't speak historically with you on that issue.
Let's go to the east of the Rockies line to Mike in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. Earlier in the show, you were talking about the burial place of Mary. You never mentioned where it is. Do you have any idea where it is?
Well, the burial place of Mary is at the Chapel of Mary in England. I don't want to give out the address per se. I'm not in the tour business, but there is a Chapel of Mary and a nice cemetery there where you'll find that the royal houses of the kings of England have traditionally been buried. And if you look at that site, you'll find that that's the site of the burial of the Virgin Mary as well.
Is that in London?
No, it's outside of. It is in England. England's not a very big country. It's not in London itself, but it's very close.
Well, I thought the kings and queens of royalty over the years were buried in the Abbey there in London.
Westminster Abbey.
Yeah.
Well, that's contemporary. The older ones were buried, and we're not talking about a very long distance away from it here. We're talking about the traditional King Arthur's. King Arthur is buried at the site of in the same graveyard with the Virgin Mary, and so is Joseph of Arimathea, and so is St. Patrick, for that matter. They're all buried in the same place.
Well, I'll have to look it up when I'm there. I've seen a lot of tombs in England, and never heard of this one there. Nonetheless, let us
It's
move.
in the Chapel of Mary.
Chapel of Mary. Okay,
Yeah,
I can't forget that, can I?
No.
All right. Well, let's. I don't really have time here for another call, Glenn. So why don't you give your website and how to get your book?
The website is ancientamericas.com. All of you are invited to come there, get a copy of the book from that site. You can also go to your local bookstore and request a copy of the Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus. It's actually not with it's Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus by Glenn Kimball. 99% of the bookstores in America can get it for you with that reference, or you can go to Amazon.com and get a copy of it. But if you go to Amazon.com, you won't get a special gift that I'll give you, which is a perpetual reminder service that I'll give out gratis for everyone that comes to the site, as well as you'll see on my site the Ancient America magazine, which is a spectacular magazine. Every dentist in the world should have this on their table.
All right, we'll complete our conversations in just the other side of the break. I am Hilly Rose, sitting in for Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM.
You're hearing Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell from the Kingdom of Nye.
Absolute lie.
That's a crock. Okay,
Yeah.
The next one is in reference to Jesus' destruction of the temple, when he trashed the temple. Is there documented background on that?
Well, Jesus didn't destroy the temple, but Caesar did destroy the temple, and as a matter of fact, they left a pillar in stone, which is still there.
Well, what I mean is the money changers, that whole...
on the money changers?
Yeah, when he went through the temple and, sometimes they said he did it with a whip or something, but where he turned over all the tables where they had the money changers and all that?
I haven't found additional references to that in extra biblical text. That's largely a biblical reference.
Okay, last question. Regarding what you said earlier this evening about writings that were, destroyed when various libraries were destroyed for religious reasons, I wondered if there were anything was ever saved from the Library of Alexandria when it was destroyed.
You are a brilliant woman.
You know what? Carl Sagan once said that he wishes beyond anything that he could get a card to the Library of Alexandria, because right now we would probably already be traversing the planets. We would probably have cures for cancer. AIDS wouldn't exist. He said that if we had the Library of Alexandria today, we would have,
Carl is
beyond.
correct. Carl is correct, but you must remember that there is rumors that the library, the Great Alexandria Library, was burnt deliberately.
Yes, I know that.
And as a result, many of the precious documents were taken out prior to the fire, and there is some very strong speculation that many of those documents still exist today in Constantinople.
Ooh.
Okay, and
thank you for what you said about me, by the way.
Yeah, and my regards to Mr. Nighthawk.
Thank you.
All righty, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We will continue here and take some final calls for Glenn Kimball after these words. West of the Rockies to Phoenix, Arizona, and Dennis. Good morning, Dennis.
Yeah, good morning. Great program.
Thank you.
I have a question. There's been a noted similarity between the legendary Quetzalcoatl of Mesoamerica and Jesus Christ. Is there any documentation to indicate that that might be more than just coincidence?
Having lived in Mexico and also in South America, Quetzalcoatl is a Mexican Mayan tradition.
Right.
When I lived in South America, I stood at when they were first excavating Tiwanaku, and the Indians had never seen white men prior to my visit there. That's how long ago it was. Mm-hmm. And they used to call me Titihuiracocha. I speak a little bit of Quechua and a little bit of Aymara, and I speak fluent Spanish, which means white-bearded God, creator of all the world. And they thought I had returned, was something to do with that myth. And as a matter of fact, in Columbus's diary, it mentions that when he was greeted on the islands, he was greeted by an Indian population who called him the white-bearded God, creator of all the world, who returned to visit them as he promised he would, which is an interesting little side note in the diary of Christopher Columbus. You can speculate one way or the other as you choose, but I find it most fascinating.
I do too. Evidently, then, no documentation that might indicate.
Well, they call him a white-bearded God, and they also there's also Mayan records which indicate that he had crosses in his hands when he appeared, and these are pre-Columbian documents.
Okay, let's go to the first-time caller line, and Tim in Lexington, Kentucky. Hi, Tim.
Hello. Fascinating show, and a quick question, and then I'll hang up and answer. I have a friend of a particular faith that they do not recognize the symbol of the cross, and the reason being is they believe, as an attempt to add insult to injury, that Jesus was crucified upside down on a pole. I was wondering if there's any documentation of that, and just where one would get started on just gaining the wealth of knowledge that you have. And I will hang up and listen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the person who was crucified upside down was Peter, and Peter didn't want to be crucified in the same direction as Jesus because he didn't feel worthy of it. The crucifixion, the ancient Messiah texts talk about the Messiah being crucified, but we have to remember that crucifixion didn't exist before about 55 B.C., and so the ancient text didn't make sense to the Jews whose method of execution was strangulation or being stoned. And so this crucifixion thing was really a strange thing for them. And when Jesus was alive, many of his friends went to him and said, hey, look, you got to beware of this crucifixion method because it's obviously Roman, and we had never heard of it before the Romans came into the world. So that should answer your question. The upside-down crucifixion was that of Peter, not of Jesus.
Okay, before you answer the second part of the question, I want to clarify it. He's asking where can he go to learn about all this, and obviously your answer is going to be your website, but I haven't seen your website. It must be just filled with information. Let's make it easy. Here is somebody who's saying, I want to start to learn about this, so where on your website, what does he go to really get the basics?
That's a wonderful question. I'm writing this series of books is called the Hidden Treasure series. I began with the very sweet, simple stories of the childhood of Jesus, and I have enough information to write 100 books in the series. The second book in the series is just coming out. The first book in the series just came out last year. If you want to, pick up a copy of my book and follow the bibliography. If it's a matter of cost, it's very inexpensive to do that because the book's under $10 and it's a very small book, easy to read, designed to be economical for everybody who wants to know something. If you pick up that and then follow the bibliographies as we go to the website, and you'll find that there are texts that you can select from as we go as well, and as your library increases.
All right, the first-time caller line in Oahu, Hawaii. Mike, good morning.
Good morning, Hilly. This is just an absolutely fascinating program, and I'm really happy to be able to get through to you. I have a question for Glenn, and it concerns John the Beloved. And you mentioned earlier in the show that after Jesus' death, he traveled to the Far East in about 58 A.D.,
Well, actually, it was earlier than that. I'm saying the Buddhist religion began officially in the year 58 A.D.
Oh, okay. Where can I learn more about John's travels there and what his ministry was? I'm particularly interested if he ever was in contact with a band of monks called the Ashayas.
Oh, my goodness. This is going to be a subject of a book of mine in the future. I'm not prepared to address the issue specifically. I have some documentation that I'm going to disseminate on my website at some point in time here in the near future with regard to the travels of John to the Far East. But we got to remember one thing. Let's talk historically for a moment. In every single emperors of China until the 15th century, there was always one white guy that, in fact, the Knights Templar were, in fact, part of this regime in the 11th through 12th century. There was always one guy that was in charge of preservation of the Scriptures and foreign commerce, which is interesting. This same group of men were there with the royal houses of India. The same group of men protected the Vatican until the 12th century when the Pope decided to murder them all, or to eliminate them all, I should say. I shouldn't say the word murder in that case. But that is an extension of the legacy of John's ministry in the Far East, because they wouldn't have known or permitted a white guy to come in there and be that prominent in that position had it not been for the legacy of John in those countries.
All right, I'm afraid we've come to the end here, Glenn, and one last time, give your website, and we're going to have to move along, and I want to thank you for sharing these 5 hours with us. Have been fascinating. They really have been. So go ahead.
You're a wonderful host. The website, obviously, is ancientmanuscripts.com. And any of you that would like to go to that website, it has my personal email address. It has my fax address. It has order forms. It has all kinds of information. For those of you who want to just don't have email or don't have computers, go to your local bookstore and say, I want a book called Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus. Pick it up, and
we go from there. I really have to go. Hey, thanks again for spending this time with us.
Not a problem.
Good night.
Good night now.
That's about it for me. I'll be here Monday and Tuesday. However, I do want to thank Delaney Conrad for answering the phones and telling me where to go here, and Marcelo Corona for playing the hits and getting the word out, getting the gospel out. Art will be back with you on Wednesday night. I'll be here Monday and Tuesday. Big UFO show concerning Britain on Monday night. I hope you'll join me, and I certainly wish you a kind and gentle night. I'm Hilly Rose.